What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over a very important video. It's when to target tight ends. Unlike other positions like running backs and wide receivers where there's really no wrong answer on when you should target them, because we're taking them through all stages of the draft, a tight end is in the minority of those positions, one where you do have to put some thought on when you should invest your draft capital into them. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which wide receiver with at least 50 targets had the highest yards per reception on third down. The correct answer was Michael Gallup. Darren Eubanks, congratulations, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which quarterback had the longest average time in pocket? Once again, that's which quarterback had the longest average time in pocket. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, be sure to check out our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Consider signing up for a draft package guaranteed to help you win your league. Get rankings and breakdowns on all draftable players. You'll have access not just for the offseason, but for the entire season as well. You'll be eligible for exclusive giveaways, courtesy of Pristine Auction. Use code FFA at sign up for Pristine Auction for a free $5 credit. Even if you're not in the market for any signed sports memorabilia right now, you may as well sign up and secure the free $5, because who's to say how long this exclusive offer will last. With all that stuff out of the way though, let's hop right into the video. So first things first, I do want to clarify on something I mentioned earlier about wide receivers and running backs being available to draft throughout all stages of the draft, and that is true, but overall, the high-end running backs are few and far between, so securing those players early on in the draft, especially round one, it's pretty important, but the wide receivers that you're getting in that range are pretty safe as well. We'll clarify more on that in the when to target running backs video. Stay tuned for that. It will be coming this offseason, but for now, I do want to talk a little bit about the tight ends and the tiers for tight ends. While this isn't the tight end rankings video where we're going to be comparing each tight end versus the one being drafted ahead and behind them, there are about 5 tight ends that can be drafted that are in the upper echelon. There are 2 tiers within those tight ends. The first 2 tight ends in tier 1, the only 2 in that tier, Travis Kelce and George Kittle. These 2 players have a remarkable amount of safety as well as upside. You know what you're going to get with them. They come with minimal injury risk. For that though, you are going to have to pay a pretty penny to land them on your team. There's no denying these are the premier tight ends in the league, but in order to land them on your team, you're going to have to pay up. We have Travis Kelce coming in as the 17th pick overall. George Kittle just a handful of spots lower, coming in at 21st overall. So a mid to back end second round pick is going to be the investment you're going to have to put into drafting these players. What I will say about that is these are not unfair values when it comes to what you're going to get versus what you're going to have to pay to get them. We always value safety in the early rounds, and how much safer can you get than knowing you're going to have a guaranteed top 5 producer at the position as long as you invest heavy draft capital into that pick. It makes sense. However, when we draft, we aren't trying to draft for fair value. Not all the time. I mean, the first round when you're drafting a top 5 running back, you'll be happy even if you drafted him as the RB2 if he finishes as the RB5. We do want to try to find players at positions that can exceed what we did pay for them on draft day. That's the only way we're going to separate our teams from our opponents. Travis Kelce, George Kittle, while you will be guaranteeing that you're going to have a potential advantage in that spot each week, it's going to come at the expense of drafting players who still have guaranteed top 10 upside at the position. So comparatively speaking, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, they're going in the same area as players like Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake, Kenny Golladay, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, all solid players that offer you that same type of safety. And by taking Kelce or Kittle where they're currently going, you're not giving anything up in regards to safety or upside, but you're not gaining anything either. So to answer the question of when we should be targeting these 2 players, only when they fall to you. You should definitely not be reaching on them. We should never be reaching in the early rounds. And the illusion of having a superior advantage by drafting these players because it comes at a position that lacks depth, you're still giving up something very valuable just to ensure that you're getting these players in return. So it's fair value. The only way to ensure these picks return and exceed value would be if they fell, but let's be honest, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, they're simply not players that are falling in drafts. Let's move over to the tier 2 tight ends, and I believe this is an area where we can try to extract some value when it comes to the draft, but similar expectations, you do have to wait for them to fall to you. But let's take a look at the actual players. Keep in mind, these are in no specific order. These aren't aren't in the order of which we have them ranked. If you do want to access our rankings and breakdowns on each of these players, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, sign up, and you'll have full access to that. So we have Zach Ertz, Mark Andrews, and Darren Waller. I will say personally, myself, the only one out of these three that I would not draft is Zach Ertz. I don't think we're going to have him as an avoid on our draft package. That's just my own personal take on him. I'm an Eagles fan too, so it's not like I'm biased. I just know that the Eagles, they do have more weapons than they ever have. Dallas Goedert continuing to improve, should see even more involvement. That's not an extreme detriment to his career or his performance this season. I know the Eagles will run a bunch of 2 tight end sets, but I just don't see him having the type of upside to potentially be the tight end 1. I don't see that in the range of outcomes for him. He is going to be safe, but I think this year more than ever is a potential year he could fall outside the top 5. I'm not calling that. This isn't a bold prediction, just something I could see potentially happening, and still the investment to get him on your team is pretty high. Let's take a look at the ADPs though. Mark Andrews is currently coming off the board as the 41st overall pick. Zach Ertz, handful of spots below that at 47, and Darren Waller, a similar amount of players back behind Ertz, coming in at the 55th overall pick. So the range for these tier 3 tight ends is going to be between 41st overall and 55th overall. That means you can land these players between the 4th and the 6th round. Now what I will say is the players that are being drafted in this range around them, that being rounds 4 through 6, this is where we're starting to see those question marks, especially at the running back position. Typically we do like to target the wide receivers in this range, but that does mean we can potentially extract value if these tight ends do fall. An example of some wide receivers that are being drafted in this range: DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, Devontae Parker, and some running backs that are being drafted around here as well are players like Devin Singletary, David Montgomery, and at the higher end, Le'Veon Bell. Clearly, each one of the players I just mentioned do have a significant amount of question marks. One of these 3 tight ends we do actually have as a target, and we feel very strongly about it, and it's also potentially a player that could fall. It's Mark Andrews, and while he is the player in this tier that does have the highest draft cost, he's also one of the only ones that I could see finishing as the TE1, and not by a small amount either. Let's take a look at his 2019 season. He finished 2019 as the tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, averaging 11.7 through his 15 contests. That was remarkably close to these top tier tight ends like Travis Kelce and George Kittle. In fact, it was only 1.2 fantasy points per game behind them. Both of those 2 tight ends averaged 12.9 fantasy points per game, so we're not talking a massive difference when it comes to production. Yet we're already getting 20 draft spots lower when it comes to draft cost, and there's reason to believe Mark Andrews has a strong chance to even improve on those numbers from last season. For one, we have chemistry. Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, that was their first full season together, and even with it being their full season together, it's not like Mark Andrews was never off of the field. No, he performed on a very limited amount of snaps. This may be difficult to believe, but Mark Andrews throughout the entire season only played on 44% of Baltimore's offensive snaps. To put that into perspective, there were 54 other tight ends in the league that played on a higher percentage of snaps than him. Yet Mark Andrews finished as the tight end 3 in fantasy points per game. And it's not like those numbers are skewed because he missed games. He played in 15 games. George Kittle, Travis Kelce, 88% of snaps and 93% of snaps. In only 2 of his final 7 games did he even eclipse 50% of snaps. A lot of people may be quick to ask the question of, is that going to occur again once this year? And while he's probably not going to play on 90% of snaps like those other 2, they got rid of Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst did play a significant role, out-snapping Mark Andrews in many contests, even finishing the season playing on 42% of snaps. Well, now Hayden Hurst is with the Atlanta Falcons, and with a player like Lamar Jackson who does scramble and make plays on his own, when plays break down, if Mark Andrews plays on more snaps, you can guarantee that he's going to have more production. So I could easily see him finishing as the first overall tight end, even if his snaps only bump up to 70+%. The team wouldn't feel comfortable with moving forward without him had he not shown us his superior ability in 2019. So yes, we do think Mark Andrews is a phenomenal pick. You're actually getting him at a point where there's value, and he's also likely a player to fall because we had only seen him one season perform at such a high level. People opt every year into drafting household names, players like Zach Ertz, over these types of players with upside like Mark Andrews, just because the name value associated with the player does provide them a false sense of security. This isn't a Mark Andrews hype video, so I'm going to jump over to the tier 3 tight ends. Once again, this is not the order of how we have them ranked, but if I were to classify this tier, I would call it the meh tier, because honestly, it's undeniable each one of these has the upside to finish top 5, but would we be surprised if any one of them really finishes the season? They all have massive risk ratings associated with them, whether it be through injury or offensive concerns. And while I'm not going to dive into each one of them individually and give you a breakdown, I will just let you know that we're not overall going to be drafting many, if any, of these players. None of them we do have as a target. Let's take a look at the ADP though. Currently, you can nab these players for an investment of a 6th through 9th round pick. We've shown the data in the past that after the 5th round, it's pretty much a crapshoot when expecting top 20 production at the position, especially when it comes to wide receivers and running backs. So it's not like drafting these players is overall going to completely ruin your team, even if they don't end up finishing the season. The odds of the players being drafted around here busting is pretty high. Even taking a look at the names, we have Darius Geis, Jordan Howard, Will Fuller. Nobody's surprised if these players bust, let's be real. So while we don't have these tier 3 tight ends listed as targets, none of them are technically avoids either. This is the tight end position after all, where the difference between TE5 and TE10 is only a handful of points. Last season, the TE6 averaged 11 half-point PPR points, and the TE10 averaged 10.2, so we're not talking a massive gap here. This is the range of the draft where we are still trying to take shots that do have a higher percentage of hitting than the later rounds, but also we do see some valuable names at quarterback here as well. So if you didn't draft a quarterback leading up to this is probably also a range you might want to consider drafting one of those as well, because when we're talking the tier 4 tight ends, these are the players that we do have several of them listed as targets and values. In fact, of the 12 players I'm listing here as tier 4 tight ends, over half of them we believe you should be targeting. If you've watched enough mock drafts, you'll know exactly who those players are, because odds are these are the players that we end up getting on our team. The reason for that, each one of these tight ends has a very strong ability to be in the mix of the names finishing between tight end 8 and tight end 12. In previous seasons, you'll know we have been very vocal about our ability and willingness to stream the tight end position, and these are going to be a handful of the many names in the mix of the tight end streaming conversation. Also, several of these players, especially the ones we have listed as targets, have the ability to consistently produce, so you're not going to be forced to stream the position if you do draft one of these guys. I think Noah Fant is definitely a name we could see playing much more consistently this year with his second season with Drew Lock, but for the most part, we're drafting these players in this range very heavily. So when asking the question, when should you target a tight end? For the most part, our answer is going to be at the tail end of the draft. Not a single one of these tight ends are being drafted before pick 100. That's right, we're in the triple digits, yet a lot of them provide top 12 upside. And with the tight end position being the way that it is, you don't require a ton of volume or a ton of production to produce at a top 12 level. We will be breaking down these players in this range in the tight ends rankings video, as well as all of the tight ends we spoke about before this. So stay tuned for that, or sign up for our draft package, which goes into even further depth. But for now, I do want to summarize everything we've gone over. In the early stages of the draft, in order to land those upper echelon tight ends, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, you're going to have to pay a pretty penny for them. And the illusion of getting a safe and consistent producer that will set you potentially apart from your opponents, you're still giving up something that, if you follow our draft strategies, is a pick that's already very safe. So you would need to hit on a lot of your late round picks in order for that to be the case. And if that does happen, then yes, that would be a difference maker on your team, but the points will be made up for it in the early rounds by drafting players with safety that have a high chance of hitting their floors and ceilings. As for the tier 2 tight ends, we love Mark Andrews. If you guys want to draft Mark Andrews, we 1000% support that decision. He's the only player in the top 10 tight ends that we do have listed as a target, which brings us to the tier 3 tight ends. In this range, there are a lot of players that do have the potential upside of providing you a top 5 level of production. However, each one of these has significant risk factors. Don't be surprised if these players do end up busting or not finishing the season, and they're still being drafted in a range in which there is still value at the picks around them. So for us, we're not going to own many players in this range or consistently draft them. However, that doesn't mean these players should be avoided. With any player, player, it all comes down to value. If they're falling and you get them several rounds later than when they should technically be drafted, how can that ever be looked at as a bad pick? Compare them to your rankings and you'll know right away if the selection is right for you. As for the tier 4 tight ends, we love drafting players in this area. Over half of the 12 tight ends listed in tier 4 are players we're going to be targeting. So you will see several players that are listed in this tier on our teams come draft time. And for that reason, when asked the question of when you should target a tight end, for the most part, we'll tell you towards the tail end of the draft. It's not one size fits all though, so everything will be on a case-by-case basis, but I hope that does help you kind of understand our strategy when it comes to drafting tight ends. If you did enjoy this video, guys, please give it a thumbs up. This is a new series we're starting out, so if you did enjoy it, let us know by hitting that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.